So I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. We are located on the traditional lands of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. The earliest peoples were hunter-gatherers of whom we know only by the artifacts they left behind. The first people encountered by Champlain were the Chodiloné people of the Deer, peaceful Iroquoians. Their neighbors were the neutral and Petun people, along with the Hurons farther north and south, the Anishinaabe Mississaugas. The university is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land granted to the Mohawk of the Six Nations that includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River, which you can see out there, in 1794 by George III. They came there in exile from their traditional lands in New York State. They reside now on the largest by population First Nations reserve in Canada. They are the direct neighbors of Waterloo architecture. We also acknowledge the generations of settlers that have made their home here among us. Oftentimes they were looking for refuge, which our Native ancestors had prepared for them. And this is a land acknowledgement that has been written by William Wordsworth, who is our elder in residence. We have a lot of collaborations with actually the Six Nations, the Mississauga of the Credit, and several other First Nations. This is a kind of growing priority for the school, both in terms of thinking about how to decolonize the curriculum and sort of engage contemporary questions in relation to race and gender and other things, but also to very much sort of acknowledge that we are neighbors to some very important First Nations communities and that there are opportunities to collaborate and share knowledge. So back in 1995, Kenneth Frampton, who's an important architectural historian, wrote, "Something unique was occurring here, an unparalleled experiment in architectural education that was not happening anywhere else in Canada, nor was it happening anywhere else in North America, as far as I could see." And we, I think, believe and very much hope that this experiment is ongoing and constantly evolving, that we see the school as a kind of experiment and we're constantly sort of refining, rethinking what the role of education is, what the role of practice is, and so forth. We've been listed, as top 5 school of architecture by Azure Magazine in North America, one of 29 architecture graduate programs in the journal Masterclass, as one of 7 non-European schools by Domus Magazine, which is a very important Italian magazine. And I guess all of this is to say we are constantly striving to deliver what I would say is a remarkable undergraduate education, and I've reviewed in pretty much most schools of architecture in North America, and I think we're doing a remarkable job in terms of developing a kind of broad, culturally engaged education, and I hope and I think raising sort of engaged citizens, engaged design citizens, but also citizens of the world. And that's part of the project of the school, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So what is it all about? I'll talk a little bit about the program, about the places that our students occupy while they are here for 5 years, some of the resources, services, extracurricular. I'll talk about our faculty and staff. I'll touch briefly on housing and computing questions, although if you're given an offer, there will be more information in May on that. And I'll talk a little bit about the admissions process, and then we'll leave time for questions. So Waterloo is what's known as a 4+2, as is TMU, Laurentian, and Carleton in Ontario. And then there are a few other, there's McGill would be that, Université de Montréal, a few others. And what that means is that we are delivering a pre-professional undergraduate architecture degree in the undergraduate. And that means that we are covering most of the required courses you would need to eventually become an architect in the undergraduate program. And that also means that when you get to the master's, it is freed up to, you can do more research, you can do more, I would say our undergrad is also speculative, but it can become really speculative because we've sort of ticked the boxes of what is accreditation. Every school of architecture in Canada and in the US is accredited. We are coming up for accreditation actually in the fall, I believe, where they review everything we do and make sure we're covering all the required courses and all the required knowledge. So we cover most of that in the undergraduate. So it's a very sort of architecturally focused undergrad program. because we have the 20 months of required co-op, in fact, we call it a 4+2, but it's actually a 5-year undergrad. And then you have the Masters of Architecture, which you can do here, or you could go somewhere else. Here it would take you can do it in as little as a year because we've kind of covered so much in the undergraduate, or some students take longer. They seem to be having too much fun. They're traveling for field work. They're doing research with faculty, or you can go do a master's elsewhere. So, but to become an architect, you need the combination of an undergrad and the Masters of Architecture. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the program. As you can see, studio is a kind of core component. It's the thing in black. Its size speaks both to its credit weighting, its time weighting, and I would say maybe also its aspirational weighting in the curriculum. We then have a stream of visual media, cultural history, which is incredibly important, and I'll touch upon all these streams a little bit later, technology and environment, and then landscape and urbanism as a fifth stream. So as you can see, in any given semester, you're getting at least 4 of the 5 streams. So we're constantly, every term, delivering a kind of comprehensive and holistic education. So I'll talk a little bit about what first year looks like. Studio throughout the whole undergrad is Monday and Thursdays. It's all day. I mean, all day means it runs all day. You're working often independently in studio. It's a bit like going to work, except you're going to studio. Some days there may be reviews or pinups or discussions. So that takes up Mondays and Thursdays. On Tuesday, you have Introduction to Cultural History. On Wednesday, you have 2 courses, Architectural Ideas and Communications, which is a kind of cultural history as well. And then 172, which is Building Construction 1. And then on Fridays, we have Visual and Digital Media, which lasts all day, which is ultimately closely dovetailed into studio. It's kind of, and it's also a lot of independent work. So on the one hand, you can see the days are full, but it's not like being in class as you would understand it in high school. You are not, sitting still and getting lectures delivered at you for 8 hours. You're really at your desk working, you're meeting with a professor for 20 minutes on a day. You might have a group meeting for an hour, and the rest of the day you're expected just to work on your own. You might go to the library, get a lunch, come back, etc. And then the winter, so 1B is very similar. And so you see the range of courses. One of the reasons we introduced building construction right from the first year is we want our students to be ready for co-op when they start in second year. So we're also making sure that they have all the representational and digital and technical and design skills to be effective in an office. The point is not that they're getting coffee, but that they're drawing and working and learning. So the 5 streams, as I mentioned, design, cultural history, visual and digital media, technology and environment, and landscape and urbanism. So studio, as I mentioned, in some ways is the place that all the other courses come together. It is the place where you're thinking about design within a cultural context. You're thinking about how it literally stands up, how it comes together. You're thinking about sustainable systems. You're not, especially in first year, you're not thinking about all those things, but by second and third and fourth year, you are hopefully thinking to varying degrees about all these questions. And it is, most of it happens in the studio space. A lot of it also happens in the loft, which you hopefully go up and see, where we will do collective discussions. We pin up informally. We have our formal reviews. So a studio might have 2 or 3 projects in a semester, and at the end of a project, you print, you make your final models, you pin up to the whole class or to a group of students in the class. We'll often invite guest professors from other schools or practicing professionals to come and talk about the work. So it's really a moment to kind of share and get feedback, and also for faculty to kind of get feedback on how we've structured the course and the assignment. Studio can involve very small scale things like furniture. It can involve sort of more art installations. It can involve sort of one-to-one building of small, we've got outside in the parking lot, you'll see there's a mini home that was built as part of a research grant, kind of engaging questions of homelessness and housing precarity, as well as obviously designing, ever increasingly complex buildings. So in first semester, you might, I think by the end, you design a small house. By the end of second semester, first year, you're designing a small community center. Second year, in the summer, you're doing a landscape studio. Then you do a large urban building. You're starting to think about structure and building systems, and the complexity kind of keeps increasing. And every term has a kind of specific focus, that's sort of part of a larger pedagogical aim. Cultural history, as I said, is a kind of critical and very unique component of the program. We see architecture as a humanistic discipline and a field of cultural speculation. And every school of architecture has architectural history courses, but what is unique about the cultural history program, and it was part of the foundations of the school, is to understand architecture within a larger cultural discussion. And so our students are reading, history, philosophy, literature, looking at fine arts, understanding architecture within the context of the city. And it's really about, understanding architecture within a larger kind of cultural discussion. They usually count as double credit courses. So I think we have more architectural history than probably any school I know of anywhere. And it's, in some ways, I see it as a kind of also opportunity for a liberal arts education, which, I went to McGill undergrad and we didn't have that. It was very engineering, and then we had 2 architectural history courses, and that was it. And then you had to figure it out on your own. And so this is an opportunity to kind of be exposed to a broader set of kind of cultural artifacts in a program that is otherwise, very architecture focused. We, of course, read a lot in cultural history. We write, but we have students that put on plays, we make models, we make drawings. So even cultural history is understood as a kind of creative and living practice. This is, and it also is seen as kind of intersecting with something, let's say, like technology. So this is a master's thesis that was done a few years ago, a student looking at housing for Indigenous communities in the Canadian far north, and she was looking at how they sit on the land and the sort of legacy of colonialism that came with that. But it was, on the one hand, a very poetic kind of understanding of the history of architecture in the north, but also kind of understanding the technologies associated with it. And you'll see this, that all these streams are constantly intersecting. They aren't siloed in any way. Rome, of course, is a critical component of the cultural history program. You go there for a semester. Everyone, in extenuating circumstances, someone may not go, but generally the whole class goes. It's designed to be a kind of full class experience. We have a permanent facility there. The city becomes a living laboratory. We do week-long tour to northern Italy, a week-long tour to southern Italy, and then these sort of day-long tours throughout Rome, given by Eric Haldenby, who knows probably literally every stone in the city, and is been famous for giving a 10-hour lecture in the Pantheon. And any Waterloo alumni will speak about these lectures, 50 years on, with huge fondness. It's a rite of passage. So then the third stream is visual and digital media, and that includes, obviously, learning different softwares, learning how to 3D print, learning how to mill, learning how to laser cut. We have a faculty who's very invested in 3D clay printing, so we have a 3D clay printer, and you'll see some artifacts, I think, in the in the windows outside the school. We have assorted robots, and then of course we have a full workshop of like traditional, power tools for people that want to make furniture or models and so forth. And so, and this is actually artifacts from the 3D clay printing. And the aim of the visual and digital media stream, which is mainly covered intensely in the first 2 years, is that by the end of it, students have a full exposure to all the tools, and then they can delve more into it both on their own, but through advanced electives in 3rd and 4th year. So we kind of cover base knowledge in the first 2 years, and then for those that want to delve into it more, and some continue into it in the master's thesis as well. Visual and digital media, this is we have also advanced studios in 3rd year that look at, that teach students coding. Actually, our current director specializes in that. We've had faculty that have worked with the transit system of the KW region and looked at kind of mapping tools on iPhones and to understand how people wayfind and understand the city through public transit. So it becomes broader and broader as you move up. So this was an advanced elective, the data lab, and is also a kind of active lab within the school. The 4th stream is technology and environment. So this includes, structures, building envelope systems, understanding how buildings are put together. We often do one-to-one drawings and one-to-one construction so that students get a kind of hands-on full understanding of what it means to assemble a building or parts of buildings. It includes also understanding sort of environmental systems and passive systems and new technologies in relation to that. This is, for instance, I think this came from one of the option studios. Someone was looking at a prototype of a kind of cladding component that could open and close in relation to sun and wind. So it branches out as you move up. And then the 5th stream is landscape and urbanism. This includes, we have core courses in history, the history of urbanism. The 2nd year studio is a landscape studio that is taught by a professor that is trained specifically in landscape architecture. She's full-time here. She also teaches a landscape theory course. And then we have many electives, both in grad and undergrad, where you can, again, delve into more specific issues on ecology, landscape, urbanism, emerging urban phenomena, new technologies in urbanism, et cetera. And many of the studios also, again, sort of intersect with this. So in 3rd year, you're doing a large urban building and thinking about its kind of urban context. In that studio, we often organize small symposium where we're bringing in guest speakers, city planners, architects working on large buildings to sort of talk about how the city comes into being and what role buildings play in making our cities. This is a master's thesis that was actually done under supervision of our current director that was looking at the relationship of species and urbanism and imagining these sort of new structures that would allow and amplify ecologies for birds in our cities and parks. And this was someone who won an Urban Design Award looking at, for instance, snow and urbanism. So looking at questions of climate and urbanism. So now I will talk a little bit about the places that the school sort of operates. So of course we are here in Cambridge. This is a transformed silk mill that was custom designed then for the School of Architecture. We are very engaged in the community. Students, as you may have seen, run the night market in opposite the cafe. Will get involved. They do a Nuit Blanche and various arts festivals, and our students will contribute art pieces for that. And we're constantly sort of looking to work and collaborate with the city. The building, of course, is critical. We make sure that every student has their own desk. This is really critical. Some schools, you're sort of hot desking. It's important that students come, they can work, they can keep their things here. It encourages peer-to-peer learning and kind of informal conversations that we think are critical to architectural education. The second place, as I mentioned, of course, is Rome, where we have a building, 2 full stories, and then the whole city becomes a kind of teaching laboratory, and then students find their own accommodations, but we've been going there for 40 years, and so there's a whole informal network of, I've never heard of students not finding accommodation. I think it sort of gets passed on from one student to the next. And as I say, the city becomes sort of, it's not just the building, but really the city. And the studio, of course, is always based. It's a kind of architecture and urban design project situated in different places in Rome. So the next thing I want to talk about a little bit is the co-op program. As you can see, so the first year you come in for the fall, you have a normal academic term, you come back after Christmas for the winter, have a normal academic term, and then you have the summer off, and that is not a formal co-op term. Some students choose to work, some students may go back and be a camp counselor or travel or do whatever they want to do. So it doesn't count as a formal co-op term. Then you come back in year 2 in the fall and have an academic term. And then in the winter, so this is where you start to get out of sync with most schools. In the winter, you're actually on a co-op term. And so we set up everything in the fall. I'll talk about it. We have a Waterloo Works that helps students find jobs. We set up an interview week. There's often a job market fair. And so in the winter, they're off on co-op. They come back in the summer for an academic term. Then in the fall of third year, they're off. They're back in the winter. Then they're back on co-op in the spring. One advantage of this is you're not competing with every other school of architecture in the world who's only obviously they're usually off only in the summer. So it has a tremendous advantage that our students are looking for jobs when very few other students would be looking for jobs. So then in what is your fourth year is your second semester of third year academically. You have an option studio and several other courses, and then you go on a double co-op. So it's an 8-month co-op. And we do that for 2 reasons. One, we think that, when you're somewhere for 8 months, you get more entrenched, you can get more responsibility, you really understand how the firm works. It's also, though, just before Rome, and so it's a chance to save up some money before you go to Rome. So it was intentionally designed that way. Then you go to Rome, then you go on co-op, and then you come back for your final semester. So what's kind of crazy is like the students right now, we have students in 3A here, and we're not going to see them again in here for like, I don't know how many months. 16 months. There's a moment where you're like, oh, I guess I won't see you for a year and a half. But they're in Rome, they're doing co-ops, etc. So you have to complete 5 out of 6 co-ops to graduate. 3 of those co-ops, I believe, have to be a minimum of 16 weeks. And then 2 can be what are called flex co-ops. I'm not sure I have the term exactly correct, where it can be 12 weeks, but there's a minimum amount of time for it to count. And all this information is given to our students, well in advance. We have probably the most international co-op program of any department in the whole university. 50% of our students are working outside of Canada. So Waterloo works through the whole university. We have relationships with many typically larger firms, typically Canadian, a few North American, a few international firms, and they will advertise jobs, and our students will submit portfolios to the firms they're interested in. There's an interview process. The students then ballot which one they prefer, and there's a kind of matchmaking system. And that is all done formally through the Waterloo Works Co-op. But I would say by second and third year, some students even from first year are actually finding their own jobs. They're finding that, and they're traveling to China and Europe and all over North America, and hence, the kind of incredible global map of where our students are going. Some students are finding them completely on their own. They just send an email, here's my CV, I'd love to work for you. And then some of it is happening through what we call the informal co-op system, which is, for instance, I know a firm in Amsterdam, they hired one co-op student, they loved them, and then they were like, hey, you're leaving, is there someone else who can take your spot? And so there's been this ongoing, series of co-op students that have been there now for 5 years. So there's a kind of tremendous different networks by which students find jobs. I believe our co-op success rate is something like 97%. It's very, very unusual. Even during COVID, actually, we had pretty good success rates. So that is never something that we worry about. Our students, as I say, work all over the world in some of the most prestigious firms. Some work in very big firms, some work in very small firms. You don't have to work in architecture. You could work in construction. You could work in, I think you can even work in things like graphic design. Like if you're interested in allied design disciplines, you can work in an engineering firm. Most work in architecture, but we are quite flexible. And again, you can always check if you're sort of interested in going a little bit outside of the sort of traditional model. I'm going to skip this because I've already talked about that. So I'll tell you a little bit about resources and services. So I would say one key resource really is the studio space upstairs, and I hope you all have had it or get a chance to go up. This sort of it is a kind of collective space. Every student has a desk there. There's a tremendous amount of peer-to-peer learning. Students, faculty, that's where we teach studio. So we will go from desk to desk every studio day and spend 20 minutes typically with each student. Studio classes are about 75. Studio, there's a 1:15 ratio. So there will be 5 faculty teaching 75 students, and we'll typically rotate throughout the term. So we get to know students really well. And work with them. And so this sort of one-to-one instruction and also the peer learning is really a critical component. We have, the professional development component is, of course, both through co-op, through design build, through lectures. All these things are kind of different modes of professional development that we see as complementary to the academic education. The workshops are, of course, a critical tool. So I mentioned all the sort of different equipment we have, the training that we offer. We actually ensure our students are all trained, I think, in the first 2 weeks of school that they can at least do the very basics. And then there's sort of further training you get for different equipment. The library is a critical resource. We have an amazing book collection and a rare book collection. But then if students need books from any of the other libraries, actually not just Waterloo, but Guelph and Laurier, you can order the book and it will be delivered here. So if you want to read a novel, if you want a book on art history, if you want a book of anthropology, all of it is delivered here. And the librarians are very kind of responsive. The gallery where the night market is a kind of important resource. We use it to exhibit student work. We sometimes exhibit faculty work. We use it as a kind of event space and sometimes a sort of additional for final reviews and things as a kind of classroom space. Another resource, interestingly enough, has become the digital tools that we developed when we had to pivot online. I would say that schools of architecture, not just us, but most schools of architecture probably delivered the best online education of any high school or university program. They found a lot of different tools to sort of simulate the peer learning, online digital pinboards where students can share their work. And so that has continued even in my own office. We use that as a kind of collaboration tool with other firms and things like that. The kind of tradition of bringing people in to kind of give lectures remotely has continued. I mean, obviously most lectures now we aim to give, but if we have if there's someone in China who's a specialist on something, we often can't fly them in for assorted reasons, but you can bring them in to give a talk for an hour. So some of there's the small upside of COVID or some of these sort of platforms have allowed new networks and new collaborations to continue. We strive really hard to maintain as many of the resources that our students would have on main campus here. So we have a small gym. We have mental health counselors that come, I believe now twice a week. We have a free taxi service for students if they work late. We have a store on the second floor where students can buy pens and paper and model making material. We can print and plot. And of course, the workshop allows you to make all the models you need. And then, as I mentioned, the library. So we really are constantly working to ensure our students have all the services that they want. The students also run a lot of extracurricular things. They have a yoga club, a running club, a soccer club. They organize their own lectures. There's Bridge, which is organizing the night market, which organizes, things like that and lectures and so forth. I will say it's quite hard to do intramural sports on main campus just because of how packed our program is and the distance. And this is part of the reason our students have been very creative and resourceful in organizing all sorts of clubs on their own. It's not impossible, but it is it is tricky. And so we try and do as much as we can here on campus. Our students have a remarkable record of accomplishment. They have won Student Prix de Rome Awards, which is the most prestigious award you can win in Canada. They've won assorted representation awards. They've won lighting awards, research awards, writing awards, etc. So I won't go through all of them, but we are committed to sort of excellence, and our students are achieving commensurately. So this is the kind of full range of faculty, both full-time and adjunct or sessional, as well as staff. We have about 21 full-time faculty now, and then I would say we have another 30 to I'm going to say 30 to 40 adjunct or sessional professors. Some of them have been with us for 20 years. Some have been with us for 5 years, and some are very new. And the sessionals, I think, are critical in terms of many are in practice, and so they bring and many are involved in studio because we'll have 5 or 6 instructors in a course, and so there aren't enough of us, the full-time faculty, to deliver that much one-on-one contact. And they bring new voices. They've often been trained in other schools. They're bringing professional practice, and so they are a critical voice in the school. We also are organizing, we do, for instance, Paths to Practice, which is geared towards our first and second years, where we organize a panel every other year to introduce students to other avenues sort of associated but related to architecture. So we might bring in a furniture maker or a graphic designer or someone who went into architectural photography or someone who started their own firm, so that they understand the kind of multiple facets of practice that they might not see in a co-op. We organize a lecture series every semester where we bring in international speakers, both academics and professionals, as well as sort of a symposium. We have a distinguished international visiting scholar program that brings in people to sort of run master classes and give talks to students. Our faculty are equally ambitious and I would say accomplished. We have faculty that are working on work with Indigenous partners. We have faculty working on digital fabrication. We have faculty working on responsive environments. That's the sort of top middle image. We have faculty that are looking at climate change and how architecture can respond to questions of floods. Down here, this might I don't know if this is still in front of City Hall. This was faculty that built a micro home looking at questions of housing and precarity through a research grant, et cetera. And then we're publishing, we're giving conferences. One of our roles as a research institution is to constantly we teach, but we also have a responsibility to be creatively and engaged in research. So, and so the faculty have also had a remarkable range of awards. We have represented at the Venice Biennale, which is the most prestigious architecture exhibition in the world, I think now for 8 years in a row. We have yet again faculty representing this year, and so forth on a wide range of, and we're more and more of our faculty are getting large research grants from from the research councils to pursue sort of long-term kind of deep research. We have the William Woodsworth, who I mentioned earlier, who is our elder in residence, who teaches several courses and, as I may have mentioned, sort of advises on kind of questions of curriculum, engaging other First Nations communities in research and build projects, and has been a kind of important presence in the school. for the past 10 years. We have a remarkable staff team that some are geared more towards serving our undergrads, some are geared towards helping our grad students, some are working in the workshops, some are in the library, and are deeply committed. We've had a remarkable team for the last 10 years, and I can tell you, you don't have a school if you don't have a good staff team. They make our machine run. Briefly on housing, if you are offered admission, there will be another session in May, which you're welcome to come to. We'll talk about it a bit more, but generally I would say we strongly encourage our students to live in Cambridge. They're long days. Students are often working after hours. If you don't have a car, the transit is not great. It's about an hour to main campus. Not something you want to be doing in the evenings. It's also, you don't want to be losing 2 hours a day on public transit. And basically the whole student body lives here. So the community is here. You know, if there are events, if there are parties, it's happening in Cambridge. And so I think both from a social point of view, from a mental health point of view, it is really important. So we don't obviously have a student residence, but we have been working with a network of landlords since we've been here, so nearly 20 years. And we're constantly getting feedback, and we vet them. And so if a landlord is not good, they get removed from the list of landlords that we'll sort of share with you in May. Housing prices have gone up, as they have everywhere in every city in Canada. And so we have a housing task force run by several faculty trying to address some of this. I mean, it's still better than Toronto and probably even KW, but it is. So we're trying to see how to address it. I don't know that we'll have solved it by September, but it is very much on our radar. But all our students find housing. It never happens that they don't find housing. The price point is maybe what is changing slightly. Software, again, we'll give you more information in May, but everyone should anticipate having a laptop or desktop. We do have a computer lab, but given how much you will do on a computer, you want your own. Some software is free, some you will need that comes at an educational discount. We anticipate the average cost of a appropriate desktop or laptop is about $3,000, but more information will be shared with you in May. So to sort of summarize, for us, design from day one is really critical. Literally, I think the second day you arrive, you start studio, you're working with classmates on design projects. The cultural history program, as I said, is really critical. Rome is a critical component of the experience. The co-op, many schools are offering co-op, but some you have to apply to get in. Some only have 1 or 2 terms. So for us, the kind of seamless integration of work and studying is part of how we envision the program, and we are deeply committed to our students. Students, faculty, and staff are really working in a kind of collaborative project. We have a real commitment to have our students complete. It is very rare that students don't complete successfully. Part of the reason we will interview 450 students in April is to make sure we are selecting students that are really committed. It's the right program. We get the sense it's the right program for them, and then it becomes this sort of tightly knit community. And so there isn't an attitude of like, we'll filter you out later. Once you're in, we will do everything in our power to ensure your success. We expect excellence from our students, and we expect excellence from ourselves. We are committed to work that's exploratory, innovative, and unconventional. And as I mentioned, there's no gap between education and practice, nor between the school and its larger community. We're constantly posting student work and faculty work on the Instagram and on our school website. Briefly on the admissions, we're obviously halfway through this process. This was from the fall. So I'm assuming everyone, well, if you're in grade 12, everyone here would have received a invitation for interviews, although there might be some grade 11 students. So if you're actually, maybe I just assumed everyone was in grade 12, but some of you might be in grade 11. So for those of you that are in grade 11, you'll apply in February to OUAC. There's a deadline to submit admission information form. Mid-March, you will either have or will, if it's next year, receive an invitation to do an interview and share your portfolio. The cutoff is really just grades. In mid-April is the deadline to submit the digital portfolio and presentation. If you're doing in person, we will be meeting with you the week of April 17th through 21st. And then the first round of offers will go out May 1st, apologies. So we get about 1,200 applicants. We offer interviews to about 450, about 120. So as you know, you will have your portfolio, you will do an interview, whether online, in person, and you have the précis. If the portfolio did not go well, we don't review the précis because that's it's very hard for someone to read 400 essays in the span of a week. So about 120 précis will be reviewed. But conversely, it is important to do well in the précis. If you had a fantastic portfolio and a fantastic interview, you still have to pass the précis. You don't have to get an A+, but you do have to pass it because the reading and writing is such an important component. And there will be information on the précis, I believe, by Rick Andrighetti. And you can get more information. It's fairly straightforward, but you want to kind of at least know what to expect. We make offers to about, I believe, about 85, 90, targeting an incoming class of about 75 to 77.